Hello again, I am Blunty, and as I sit here, my body twitching and contorting into wretched and mangled shape, suffering, as I am, the dopamine withdrawal symptoms that have arrived now the servers for the stage 1 of the second beta of Monster Hunter Wilds have been shut down. But as I twist in my misery, I've had time to think about one of the significant new changes that Wilds is bringing to the Monster Hunter formula, that being actively carrying 2 weapons and being able to switch out those weapons at basically any point you like, whenever you like, wherever you like, even in the heat of battle, like literally while you're under attack, dodging stuff. And specifically, I've been trying to think practically about how actually dynamic and useful that is. Or, indeed, if it's not useful at all and will in fact be a gameplay mechanic that basically no one even uses because it's stupid. I've seen quite a few discussions about this since the feature was first revealed, and I don't think it's something we can fully come to grips with until the full game is in our hands and we find out exactly how practical and useful it is, in the real gameplay loop. But what I can tell you is this, personally. In my, let's just call it, excessive number of hours, perhaps embarrassing number of hours in the betas so far, I have actively switched my weapons mid-hunt maybe 4 times total. And maybe once or twice more accidentally by slopping button presses. Oh, I've tried every single one of the 14 weapon types multiple times on multiple hunts, and I can't even count how many hunts I went on with my favorite ones, but I'd almost always switch out to different weapons at camp before even accepting or joining a new hunt. Or I'd switch my weapon while on my way to begin engagement with the monster. Basically never during the fight or even during a zoning transition as the monster relocated. But here's the thing about that behavior. It was the beta, and my goal with playing this way was to evolve a feel for the new and changed mechanics that each weapon is experiencing. And doing that kind of testing simply works best if, keep using the weapon for the whole time of each hunt. And I'm talking about persevering with it even when I wasn't feeling good about that particular matchup of weapon and monster. As an example, I think the light bowgun is not especially efficient for Valaharbor. I have a lot more fun with this monster carrying a charge blade or a switch axe or a hunting horn. But I was testing something, so even as I was commenting, having a little bit of a whine really, on my live stream about the bad matchup I feel like this is for me and the way I hunt, I didn't switch out, I stuck with the light bowgun anyway. By the way, just on that note, if you haven't hunted Raydal with a light bowgun yet, give that a go. Super fun. But if this were the real game, the full game, and I was playing properly instead of dicking around trying out stuff, would this be when I'd call in my sacred and switch out? Maybe. If it was the very first time I was fighting that monster, and only the first time, or maybe the first few times at most. But in these games, of course, we fight each monster many, many times over. So instead of starting the fight with a less ideal weapon matchup, I'd probably just take the more fun weapon into that fight to begin with, wouldn't I? Because I'd already know how I feel about certain matchups. During the weekend's live streams over on Twitch, we chatted about weapon matchups and good weapon pairings and whatnot. But also, someone asked me how they should choose a secondary weapon. Like, they couldn't make up their mind. They really love their dual blades and they don't know what to match up with it. And I mentioned to them that, well, you don't actually have to have 2 different weapons, And I made a suggestion they could carry 2 sets of dual blades. One for doing flat damage, and the second set specifically for applying elemental damage or status effects, which the dual blades are really good for. And they were pretty excited about that idea because that thought hadn't occurred to them yet. And I wonder how many other people out there have just sort of assumed that you have to carry 2 different weapons, because you don't. And while not every weapon is all that useful with that plan, switching out to elemental or a status versus damage, a great sword, for instance, great at massive burst damage, kind of arse for playing, say, sleep or paralysis to create extra openings. But how about hunting horn? There's been chatter about pocket horning, that being, carrying a hunting horn, only using it at the start of an encounter to set up some buffs, and then switching out to your quote-unquote real main weapon while those buffs last, and then switch back to hunting horn to reapply them when they run out. This playstyle, by the way, is being slightly nerfed in the final game to discourage this behavior. This is kind of not what the devs intended or want people to play hunting horn like, so maybe rethink that if that was your plan. But What about carrying 2 hunting horns? One to set up lower priority things like earplugs and tremor resistance, and then switching out to a second one for attack and defense up buffs and the like. That could be far more interesting. Or one horn for heavy support with elemental resistances and healing and recovery speed boosting songs. Use that one while playing in a team that needs the extra support, and a much more offensive and higher damage horn for solo play, or with a high skill team who don't need as much active survivability help. Because that kind of choice is something you might have to make dynamically during the fight. I've also seen it suggested that pairing basically any melee weapon with a ranged one would be a useful idea for switching out to range when the flying monsters take to the air, for instance, and become much harder to strike with melee, so you can shoot them down and then switch back to melee. That idea is kind of silly to me because we already have tools for that. Like flash bombing, almost any flying monster will plop their ass right out of the sky instantly, much faster than trying to shoot it down with a flinch. I mean, there are exceptions, of course. Hands up out there. Hands up, everybody. Be honest. Who learned the hard way not to flashpod Lunastra? My hand is up, by the way. You can't see it, but it's very up. That was a lesson I learned after, I think, 3 flash bombs. Hang on a sec, there's a pattern here. But still, in general, not a great use for the weapon swap, I think, that one. Alternatively, 2 ranged weapons could work. Heavy and light bowgun, for example, now that they're more separated in function than they have been before, or indeed just 2 versions of the same type of bowgun. I can see potential in carrying, one for specializing in sticky bombs and or spread ammo, or paralysis and sleep and the like, for creating and then exploiting openings, but for the more dynamic sections of a fight, or a monster that's, less vulnerable to that kind of stuff. Or, once you've exhausted all your status ammo in your pockets, all the monster has built resistances, then you switch out to a weapon strong with normal or pierce ammo, just do your flat damage. That could make being a gunner feel more flexible and dynamic than ever before. That seems fun to me. Or maybe it's something as simple as if you main a blunt weapon, you carry a secondary cutting weapon just to finish off tail cuts while you're solo. There are other ways to try and do that. Kunai, for example, you can get away with that, but just carrying a sword would just make that a lot simpler and easier. But I just can't shake how during the beta, I almost never even considered swapping out. Like, it wasn't in my mind. I wasn't thinking about it. Even when I wasn't doing some deliberate testing and I was just having funsies. And a big chunk of that is, of course, as you might imagine, in the literal thousands of hours I've played the other Monster Hunter titles, it's not something you ever had the opportunity to do. So it's not part of how I think about engaging with the game. I mean, outside of switching weapons after a cart at camp, or at least fast traveling back to camp between zones to refill ranged ammo or switch out a weapon because you forgot to change away from your fire elemental charge blade before you started fighting raging Brachydios because you're a huge dum-dum and now you have 7th degree burns all over your body and a concussion that would make an American footballer worry about you. Not that I've ever done that, of course, this is entirely theoretical. Who would be that stupid? So, maybe it's just a case of breaking old habits, building new muscle memory and combat tactics and instincts. It may be that clever set building and active weapon switching will become one of the meta strategies. Or perhaps it is just a gimmick that hardly any of us will actively use and will all continue to specialize in one highly refined build and playstyle for a single weapon, or at least a single weapon type for any given hunt. Personally, I think I'm going to actively try to use the new system. I'm going to try and force myself to engage with it to see, just how good or how bad it can be. I haven't quite made up my mind yet, but I'm either going to main Switch Axe or Charge Blade and pair whatever that choice is with Hunting Horn. And I'll probably also keep a light bowgun set built up and up to date because I do like to switch out to ranged every now and again. But Switch Axe or Charge Blade, whatever, both can lend themselves very strongly to elemental and status. So the plan, I think, will be to carry one flat damage power file weapon and supplement it with an elemental choice or a status choice and sort of keep my main one on me but switch out which elemental secondary is in my carry bag for each hunt. In Monster Hunter Rise, for example, I really enjoyed exhaust files on Switch X. There were a couple of really fun choices with those. But they weren't exactly the strongest choices for actual damage. And sooner or later, the monster builds a resistance to exhaust, so at some point in the fight, you're just less effective than you were. So in Wilds, maybe I play exhaust or paralysis or poison or whatever until I smack 2 or 3 of those off for big openings, and then switch out to the power file for the rest of the hunt for much more efficient damage. Feels like that would work really nicely, for how I like to play anyway. Same thing for the dual hunting horn idea, swapping out depending on the needs of the team that I happen to be matched with. Do they need more survivability support, or do I switch out for more active and offensive stuff? But swapping between 2 different weapon types, say my charge blade and hunting horn, in the middle of a hunt, I don't know if that feels right for me. I think it might break whatever flow state and rhythm I find myself in any given hunt. You know how it feels when you just sort of find the flow with your weapon? You don't really want to switch away from that, would you? But hey, maybe if you can't find your flow, maybe that's when you switch middle of the hunt. I don't know. Like I said, it's hard to know for sure until the final game actually releases and, we're engaged with it properly, when we can actually have multiple choices of each weapon type to pair up together, and each weapon has its finalized moveset and specs, because right now the beta doesn't even fully represent that much. 4 of the weapons are getting significant changes. All the weapons are still being fine-tuned. So, Capcom, bring it on, man. I think I'm genuinely excited for the new mechanic, and I hope it's fun. But yeah, there's a little sort of spark of cynicism in me too, thinking maybe it's just a gimmick that we just won't wind up using. But at the very least, it is a pretty interesting unknown factor right now to think about and have a chat about and talk about, as we just have been, and I look forward to seeing what you guys think about it in the down below. Thanks for watching. I am Bloody. Thank you to the patrons, and I will catch you next time.